Think for a moment about our modern forms of entertainment. The internet, television, Game Boy Color. And then imagine yourself back in Victorian times, where none of these things exist. Well, I assure you it's anything but dull, despite the absence. On any given evening in the 19th century, a short walk through London might reveal a humble pub, with drinking labourers gathered around a game of skittles. Or you might find yourself at a crowded music hall, echoing with raucous laughter as the young couples dance together. Perhaps your tastes are a little bit more refined. You might find yourself in a grand country estate, where an aristocratic ballroom is filled with the glow of candlelight, as elegantly dressed couples waltz to a live orchestra. It kind of beats the stereotype of Victorians, right? You know, stern, straight-laced, work, sleep, go to church. Well, that's not quite the reality. Human beings are human beings, and if there's anything we can say about everyone around the world, whatever time they're from, is that they like to have a good time. And the Victorians were certainly avid seekers of amusement. And so from those gritty streets of industrial cities to the manicured lawns of the country manors, people of every class found ways to just have fun. So that's what we're talking about today. What did people do in those times? How did they enjoy themselves? All the way up from the labourer to the aristocrat. So come and spend the next hour with me and we can talk about that. Just normal people. But first, let me welcome you to the channel. Hello to any newcomers, great to have you with us. And hello to anyone coming back. Good to have you back again. We're off for another adventure, aren't we? I would also like to say thank you to the patrons and members for keeping everything ad-free across the entire channel. You won't find any ads here, a veritable sanctuary amid our modern world choked with advertisements. Well, we hate them as much as you do, so here we are doing something about it. So thank you to those supporting. We also have a merch store to check out if you like, and the occasional donation helps too. But you're helping enough just by being here, liking, subscribing, leaving a comment, and telling your friends about it. In any case, I won't go on about that. We've said it once, we won't need to say it again. Let's begin our video for today. And why not start with the working class? After all, that is the foundation of society, don't you agree? Well, Victorian working class men and women, they certainly laboured long hours for low pay. And, well, that is not a stereotype. That is unfortunately the reality. Sometimes it sounds familiar for people in the modern time, I'm afraid. Things have gone backward a little bit. But we must say, though, by late 19th century times, some legal reforms had shortened their workdays a little. But, of course, this didn't mean that they didn't eagerly seek moments of relief from that daily hardship. Despite limited means, the lower classes invented a pretty vibrant leisure culture on the city streets and in those crowded pubs. Now, first of all, we have these general social gatherings in pubs. For many working men, the epicenter of social life was the local pub or the beer house, a simple tavern, often born from the 1830 Beer House Act, which made it easy to set up alehouses. After that, well, really anyone could go into the business. After a grueling shift in perhaps a mill or a dockyard, labourers would pack these smoke-filled rooms to drink cheap beer and perhaps enjoy a bit of camaraderie. After all, everybody's in the same position. You can just imagine that they'd go in to complain about their boss or other co-workers or gossip or just talk about life in general. Don't think that they're too far removed from the normal pub talk. Other things being said in pubs I won't mention. Well, improvised entertainment filled many an evening. Men gathered to play pub games like cards, skittles, which we mentioned, which, by the way, is a kind of 9-pin bowling game. And they even had an early form of darts, and one could frequently find a friendly contest underway with the prize of a pint involved. And then there was singing, too. That was also a beloved pastime. Perhaps a factory hand or a coal miner might burst into a popular ballad after a few ales, prompting a hearty sing-along from everyone in the pub. And, well, this is still quite common in Britain, too. Britons love doing those old songs and the chants at the football and all that sort of thing. In any case, in the back room of certain pubs, informal concerts and comic acts would sprout up. Early precursors to the music hall, of course. Women of the working class, well, they seldom drank in pubs. Some stereotypes. We had social conventions that frowned upon that. That was certainly true. But they were welcomed at these little performances, or nights that were called free and easy. Say, shaking off of a few social conventions. In fact, working-class women often found their leisure in community settings, chatting with neighbors on the stoop or at the wash-house, enjoying street dances, and joining family outings to the fair or music hall on special occasions. But their opportunities were fewer, we have to say, but not entirely absent. It wasn't like all women were just shoved into the home, and do remember that women were working in the factories too, and the fields and everywhere else. Many a young factory girl saved up her pennies to buy a bright hat for Sunday and would stroll with friends in the park, savoring those moments of respite from toil. Such evenings in the pub or neighborhood gave the poor a sense of warmth, laughter, and community, balances out the drudgery of their work days. Now, meanwhile to all this, pious reformers of the era tried to civilize the workers' leisure. The fun police, basically, promoting temperance meetings, tea gardens, and the closing of pubs on Sundays. But they didn't have very much success with that. Nothing beats the Sunday roast, of course. Well, people who had labored all week generally guarded their right to relax in their own fashion. The only little joy they had in their life, they weren't going to let anybody take that away. And quite rightly. But not all working-class fun required a roof overhead. There was plenty to be found outside. The Victorian London streets themselves teemed with entertainment. Strolling along a busy thoroughfare, one might encounter street performers of every kind, just like you have buskers in modern cities, really. You'd have itinerant musicians playing fiddles or barrel organs, acrobats tumbling on a mat, even fire-eaters and sword-swallowers, which drew quite astonished crowds. And then there were puppet showmen, too, staging the ever-popular Punch and Judy comedy with its absurd slapstick violence that set children squealing with laughter. But there were also travelling showmen, who exhibited curiosities for a penny or two. A freak show, displaying a dwarf, perhaps a bearded lady, or a small menagerie with a monkey or exotic parrots. Some clever entrepreneurs wheeled out peep show boxes and magic lanterns, that is, early projectors, charging passer-by a halfpenny to glimpse at painted scenes or short illuminated slides. In the poor neighborhoods, where few owned books or toys, these street amusements were quite a welcome distraction. After all, in the poor neighborhoods, going back home, well, the home wasn't much to go back to. If you've listened to my video about the London slums, well, maybe you'd want to spend a bit more time outside. Well, of course, children in the slums, they had their own games as well. And children always find a way to have fun. They bowled wooden hoops along cobbled lanes, chalked out hopscotch grids on the pavement, and chased one another in lively rounds of tag. Simple pleasures that didn't cost anything, but they provided vital joy. Even on the hardest days, laughter could be heard ringing off the brick walls of the alleys. And Victorian social investigators of the time certainly noted this appetite. As one observer recorded, working people only want to laugh. They would happily attend better shows if the price was as cheap as the penny gaff. In fact, when a rare high-quality concert was put on for a penny, 4,000 costers, that is, street sellers, crowded in to enjoy it. With this frank recognition that costermongers and labourers craved amusement on their own terms, helped eventually shift the attitudes in societies. Penny theatres and music halls, well, they sprang up by the mid-19th century, and they were one of the greatest gifts to the working class, the rise of cheap commercial entertainment. Small dingy theatres, known as penny gaffs, sprang up in working-class districts, often in converted pub rooms or shabby courtyards. And just for a penny or two, depending on the show, even the poorest could squeeze into a crowded gallery and watch a melodrama, a rowdy farce, or perhaps even an onstage clown act. They certainly had them, too. The atmosphere in these venues was boisterous and unrestrained. Audience members, many of them young apprentices or street boys, would cheer the heroes, boo the villains, and sometimes they'd even hurl nutshells or orange peels at the performers who failed to please. Refined acting or elegant scenery mattered far less than excitement and humour. As long as a show made them laugh or gasp, then all the spectators would be quite satisfied. Charles Dickens himself observed in 1850 that working people had, quote, an innate love for dramatic entertainment, and indeed have a right to be amused. Thanks in part to such advocacy, public opinion gradually accepted that leisure was not some luxury for those who could afford it, but it was something for everyone, even the poor. But out of the taverns and penny gaffs grew the Victorian music halls, a new kind of venue that exploded in popularity from the 1850s onward. You see, music halls were lively establishments where patrons could eat, drink, and even smoke at tables while enjoying a variety show on stage. For an affordable ticket, just a few pence, by the way, a labourer and his friends could spend an evening watching singers, comedians, jugglers, and perhaps even a risque dancing act. The tone was informal and often bawdy. Famous performers like Marie Lloyd became beloved for their cheeky songs. One popular one was Champagne Charlie, satirized a toff who spends all his money on champagne, kind of making fun of the rich. The poor like to do that. And witty patter that made audiences roar with laughter. The crowd itself, well, they were part of the show. They sang along to rousing choruses, shouted jokes to the stage, and didn't hesitate to boo a dull act off the boards. Really no rules. Well, by the 1870s, there were hundreds of music halls across Britain's cities. Some say there were even 300 in London alone. They offered a cheap escape for cab drivers, dock workers, costermongers, and maid-servants alike. Middle-class moralists often sniffed that music halls were vulgar dens of vice, and they probably were, to be honest. But for the working class, they were a cherished social space. And here, at last, was entertainment designed for them. Loud, unpretentious, and of course, full of dirty jokes, but more importantly, full of life. The working poor also clung to older traditions. Annual fairs had long been highlights of popular culture. and although many rowdy fairs were toned down or banned in the Victorian age, some of them did manage to survive. It was a special thrill when a travelling circus or menagerie came to town, pitching a big tent on the village green, and parading elephants, lions, tightrope walkers, and clowns, all to astonish the audience of local farmhands and gentry alike. In the era before cinema, a circus visit was a sensational and almost magical occurrence that people would talk about for years. Even today, I think it's great when the circus comes to town. Everyone sort of starts talking about it, saying, "Oh, are you going? Yeah, let's go, let's go and see it." Don't miss the opportunity, even if it's a small circus. Go and see it. Unless it has animals in it. We don't want to go to circuses with animals in it. I think they've banned them now, depending on what country you're in. Well, in country towns, the yearly festival or fair still brought travelling rides, garish sideshows, and street vendors selling sweets, giving farm labourers and servants a rare day of merriment. In cities, public celebrations like Guy Fawkes Night on November 5th, with bonfires and fireworks and royal jubilees and parades on holidays, drew in all classes into the streets in a shared carnival atmosphere. By mid-century, a significant innovation reached the industrial working class: the Seaside holiday. Yeah, they were doing it back then too. In northern factory districts, mills began to shut down for a week in summer for maintenance, a break known as Wakes Week. Workers pooled their meagre savings to take excursion trains to newly developed seaside resorts like Blackpool, Southport, or Margate. There many saw the ocean for the first time, and revelled in simple pleasures, paddling in the waves, riding a donkey on the beach, or just strolling on the piers with amusement booths. Seaside resorts quickly added new thrills to keep visitors coming. By the 1890s, Blackpool boasted a glittering promenade lit with electric lights, and they even had a 500-foot observation tower modelled on the Eiffel Tower, while Brighton offered aquariums and penny arcades. For people accustomed to dark mills and narrow streets, the seaside felt like a wonderland of light, space, and simple joys. These short holidays were certainly hard-won delights in the lives of people who were usually dominated by toil and rules. They also spurred the growth of affordable tourism, as railroads and entrepreneurs recognized the demand from the masses for a few days of fun away from the smoky cities. But even without traveling far, the urban working class gained more access to green spaces as the century progressed. Philanthropists and civic leaders, anxious about the health effects of crowded slums, they were still working things out, but they got there eventually. They began to create public parks in industrial cities. By the 1870s and 80s, many towns boasted well-laid parks with bandstands, promenades, and playgrounds where families could relax on a Sunday. On summer weekends, one could find working-class couples in their Sunday best listening to a brass band concert in the park, or fathers teaching their children to fly paper kites on the grass. These were novel experiences for people who had grown up amid, soot-stained brick and crowded alleys. Not the best way to raise your kids. The Victorian belief in rational recreation, the idea that wholesome leisure could improve moral and physical health, led to libraries, mechanics institutes, and even public baths being established for the poor. Public bathhouses, some including large pools, gave working folks a chance to wash and also, just swim around for a bit of fun. So little by little, opportunities for leisure widened. By the 1880s, rising real wages and laws limiting working hours, especially for women and children, meant that workers had a bit more free time and a bit more money to spend on leisure. The introduction of the official bank holidays in 1871 began to give all classes a few fixed days off for recreation as well. Many working people used this time vigorously. Sport in particular became a growing outlet. Entire communities rallied behind a local football team by the 1890s, and thousands of fans, not only the working poor but also clerks and shopkeepers, would pack into improvised stadiums to cheer on a match. The roar of the crowd at the sporting event was becoming another sound of Victorian leisure, and that was something that cut across class lines. But amid these many diversions, the Victorian working class demonstrated resilience and creativity in seeking their own enjoyment. Life couldn't just all be about drudgery in the factories and resting in the tenements. There were songs, games, thrills, and laughter to be had, and that's some way to sustain the spirit of the people. If there was a moralist who scolded them for spending pennies on beers and theatres, most workers would reply that a little enjoyment was essential to endure their hard lives. As one commentator noted, you cannot expect a man, spent with irksomeness of compelled labour, to simply sit by his cold fireplace every night. Working-class Victorians claimed their right to amusement. Their humble pleasures, often rowdy, unruly, or vulgar by polite standards, laid the groundwork for a broader democratization of leisure in Britain. And so next, let's have a look at the middle class, a bit of a step up. How did they entertain themselves? Well, of course, they had their own style and own social conventions. By the mid-Victorian era, Britain's middle class was growing, both in number and in influence. Now, when we say middle class, we're talking about these shopkeepers, the professionals, the entrepreneurs, and clerks. Families with moderate prosperity and a keen desire to be respectable. Now, their approach to leisure reflected their values. Middle-class entertainment was meant to be wholesome, edifying, and family-oriented, even as it remained enjoyable. Doesn't sound as fun as the other entertainment we discussed, but all right. Well, with more disposable income and more regular hours than the labouring poor, the middle classes in Victorian Britain cultivated a rich leisure life centred on the home and community. Victorian middle-class men and women enjoyed a variety of recreations, often centred around the domestic sphere. Evenings frequently found the family gathered in the parlour for civilized fun. Reading aloud was a common delight. A father might read from a Dickens novel or recite a bit of Tennyson's poetry, while everyone listened attentively by lamplight. Even cheap mass fiction blossomed in this era. Lurid pamphlets nicknamed penny dreadfuls, costing 1 penny by the way, offered young readers thrilling tales of vampires, villains, and vigilantes, proving that the love of a good story spanned all social ranks. The Victorians also loved parlour games. Classics like charades, 20 questions, and blind man's buff enlivened many a gathering, providing laughter behind the drawn curtains of a respectable family's home. And then at the upright piano, an almost mandatory possession in the middle-class drawing room, daughters would play and sing popular songs or liked classical pieces, entertaining parents and siblings. No doubt when guests were over, people would show off their children's skill on the piano. Music making was at once a hobby and, of course, a social grace. Young ladies were expected to be tuneful hostesses. In an age before recorded music, these home performances filled evenings with melody. The spirit of play extended to crafts and hobbies as well. Women might do embroidery or crochet gifts, while men curated small collections of stamps, insects, and antiquarian knickknacks. Such amusements were not only relaxing, but also showed refinement and industrious use of one's free time. But outside the family circle, the middle class embraced socializing that balanced fun with self-improvement. They formed reading clubs, church groups, and mechanics institutes dedicated to rational recreation, Leisure that enriched the mind, that is. It was fashionable, for instance, to attend public lectures on science, history, or travel in local halls, turning free time into an educational experience. In fact, a well-known scientist demonstrating an experiment with electricity could pack an auditorium with curious townsfolk. But at the same time, there were more light-hearted gatherings. The dinner party became a cornerstone of middle-class social life. Hosts prided themselves on inviting a few friends or neighbors for an evening of good food and conversation around the dining table. After a fine meal, guests might play cards or attempt a round of charades in the parlor, or simply converse over tea and cake. Middle-class towns also organized assemblies and dances in civic assembly rooms, where clerks, lawyers, merchants, and their wives could waltz and socialize under polite supervision. In cities, gentlemen increasingly spent leisure hours at private clubs, reading the newspaper or playing billiards in plush surroundings, while ladies paid daytime calls to each other's homes for a cup of tea and a bit of a chat. Over tea and biscuits, of course, Victorian women would converse, exchange news, and display their best china and manners. But on occasion, a party would try something novel, perhaps a parlor séance with a spirit medium, as spiritualism, that is, attempting to communicate with the dead, was a bit of a fad that even respectable Victorians dabbled in. I did a whole video on it, by the way. It's quite a phenomenon. But all of these activities allowed the middle ranks of Victorian society to enjoy themselves, of course all within the bounds of propriety. They socialized, networked, and courted potential spouses, all while upholding the era's strict standards of respectability. The rising middle class also joined the broader world of public entertainment that cities had to offer. They became avid patrons of the arts and culture. A night at the theatre or opera, once a luxury for aristocrats only, became a common treat for bank clerks, teachers, shopkeepers, and their families. Cities like London, Manchester, and Glasgow boasted grand theatres where middle-class audiences in affordable seats enjoyed drama or an opera, perhaps the new genre of Gilbert and Sullivan comic operetta. Theatre managers made sure to present wholesome productions, Shakespeare revivals, moral melodramas, etc., things that accorded with the middle-class tastes. And so you can imagine a Victorian couple, dressed up in their best clothes, attending a performance by the famed actor Henry Irving, all laughing along to a Savoy opera. Such outings provided delight and also let families display their cultured taste. Similarly, the expanding world of museums and galleries welcomed middle-class visitors too. Strolling through a museum on a Saturday was considered an elevating way to spend leisure time, and parents often took their children to gaze at ancient mummies or dinosaur fossils as an educational outing. The pinnacles of such edifying amusements were the great exhibitions, and the greatest of them was in 1851, where thousands of Victorian families flocked to the Crystal Palace in London to marvel at the technological wonders and artworks from around the world. In later years, similar international expositions and local industrial exhibitions continued to blend education with entertainment. For the Victorian middle class, leisure often had a purpose. Enjoyment was coupled with self-improvement and civic pride. But not all middle-class leisure was so earnest. Victorians also delighted in lighter recreations. Of course, we've mentioned the craze that swept through the drawing rooms, the paranormal craze. So let's talk about that a little bit more. In the 60s and 70s, spiritualism became oddly popular among respectable folk. It was not uncommon for a group of friends to hold a séance in a darkened parlor, joining hands around a table in an attempt to communicate with the spirits. table-turning, ghostly raps, and trance-speaking mediums provided the evening's thrilling entertainment. Well, whether the participants truly believed in the phenomena or not's a different thing. Well, I did do a video just on that in general, which I said, but if you want a bit more detail, look at my biography of Helena Blavatsky, because she was quite a popular spiritualist of the time. Well, even some eminent figures dabbled in these occult amusements as a kind of fashionable diversion. And this trend in general illustrates that the middle class hungered for novelty, just as others did, though they often cloaked such pastimes in the language of scientific inquiry or religious solace just to keep things respectable. By the late Victorian period, the middle class also joined wholeheartedly in the emerging culture of sports and outdoor recreation. Activities that promoted health, character, and social interaction were particularly encouraged. One great craze was for lawn games. Croquet swept through suburban gardens in the 1860s, allowing ladies and gentlemen to play together on equal footing. It was a gentle competition that doubled as a flirtatious social activity. Hot on the heels of that came lawn tennis in the 1870s and 80s, a faster-paced game that quickly became quite popular. Middle-class youths donned white tennis attire and formed clubs to volley on trimmed lawns. And just like croquet, it allowed men and women to play together, within the proper bounds, which surely added to its appeal in an age of formal courtship rituals. Well, by the 1890s, even more rigorous outdoor exercise for ladies, such as brisk bicycling, was considered to be acceptable, reflecting subtle shifts in social norms. Many sports beloved today were codified by Victorian enthusiasts. Men who had played cricket or rowed at school carried those pastimes into adult life, setting up local cricket clubs and rowing regattas. Spectator sports, too, gained middle-class followers. Respectable fans went to see the new organized football matches or cheered at county cricket games, sharing in the excitement that had once been confined mostly to the lower orders. Victorians also extolled the simple benefits of fresh air. Weekend outing trips became quite common. A family might take a train to the countryside for a picnic or a nature walk, or join a rambling club to hike through woods and hills. And with the invention of safer bicycles in the late 1880s, cycling turned into a national obsession across class lines. Middle-class men and women alike took to the roads on two wheels, enjoying an exhilarating sense of freedom and mobility. And by embracing these sports and outdoor hobbies, the middle class added physical vigor to their repertoire of amusements, making recreation a key part of a balanced modern life. But there's an often overlooked but profound change in Victorian leisure. We mentioned it a bit in the earlier section, the democratization of travels, this expansion of railways and the innovation of package tours by entrepreneurs like Thomas Cook allowed the middle class to venture far beyond their hometowns. As early as the 1840s, Cook arranged excursion train trips for temperance groups, and by the 1860s, he was offering affordable itineraries to resorts in Scotland, Wales, and even to great European events like the Paris Exposition. A bank clerk's family could now aspire to a short holiday away from home. Many chose to visit the seaside, just as the working class did during Wakes Week, though the middle class tended to go to more genteel resorts. They had towns like Brighton, Eastbourne, and Bournemouth. They catered to middle-class tastes with respectable boarding houses, genteel promenades, brass band concerts, and bathing machines that allowed the modest entry into the sea. A week at the shore, building sand castles, listening to waves, eating ices on the pier, became a cherished ritual for many urban families. Some adventurous middle-class tourists even travelled abroad on guided tours to Europe's great cities or the Alps, proudly returning with souvenirs and tales of continental sights. This widening horizons was a triumph of the Victorian age. Leisure was no longer confined to one's own backyard. And so in all these ways, the Victorian middle class found enjoyment that reflected their ideals. They filled their free hours with activities that were decent, cultivated, and often, in general, quite enlightening, walking away feeling like they had learned something. It wasn't just about having a good time. Now, whether they were gathered around the family piano, taking tea with friends, or cycling down a country lane, they believed leisure should refresh the spirit without corrupting it. This ethic of respectable recreation, that was the hallmark of the middle-class identity, and it helped set patterns for modern leisure. And so now let's take another step up. We turn to those at the top of the social pyramid, the aristocracy and the upper classes. Let's see how they indulged in pastimes with their ample means and time at their disposal. It's a lot different. Of course, if the middle class pursued leisure with propriety, the upper class, the gentry and aristocracy, enjoyed it with opulence. Victorian Britain's elite had wealth, they had land, and they had servants to attend to their needs, and that meant that they could devote enormous time to amusement. In fact, for many lords and ladies, social entertainment was almost a full-time occupation and a key mechanism for maintaining their status. Their pastimes were grand in scale and elaborate in ritual. From aristocratic country sports on vast estates to glittering ballrooms in London's high society, the upper class cultivated a lifestyle where pleasure, politics, and prestige intertwined. The amusements of dukes, duchesses, earls, and top bankers set the tone for Victorian high society, often appearing in newspapers and novels as the epitome of glamour. Yet beneath the surface, these leisure activities also reinforced this kind of class solidarity and power networks. Important marriages or business alliances, they were frequently brokered at play. Well, with virtually no financial constraints, the Victorian upper classes could indulge in the best of the best, and they created their own world of splendid amusement. Let's take a look at first the pursuits in the country and sporting life. A significant portion of upper-class recreation took place on their country estates. They weren't living in the cities. They were a bit too dirty. They were outside, like we said. The manners among the manicured lawns. The Victorian aristocracy held dear the traditional country sports passed down over generations, seeing them as both, sport, but also as a kind of social ceremony. And chief among these is fox hunting. During the autumn and winter hunting season, red-coated gentlemen, and some daring ladies riding side-saddle, gathered at dawn with packs of hounds to chase foxes across miles of fields and woods. Fox hunting was far more than the thrill of the chase. It was a theatrical event with formal costumes, winding horn calls, and strict etiquette. It brought together the local gentry for an exhilarating gallop, followed by a hearty post-hunt breakfast. Similarly, the landowning class relished shooting parties on their estates. In late summer and fall, noble hosts invited friends for multi-day gathering to hunt game birds like grouse, pheasant, and partridge. By day, the gentlemen and occasionally ladies, but not too often, fanned out with shotguns across moors and woodlands, aiming at flocks of birds flushed by beaters. By evening, they convened in the manor's grand dining room for lavish dinners, and to compare and celebrate the day's catch. These shooting excursions were carefully choreographed affairs, from the coordinated drives that sent game toward the guns, to the picnic luncheons served outdoors on linen and silver. Success was measured in hundreds of game birds shot, often for bragging rights, and a well-run shoot enhanced a host's reputation. Other rural leisure activities included fishing for salmon or trout in one's private river, horseback riding purely for pleasure on the estate grounds, and hosting quaint harvest home festivals for tenant farmers, which, while ostensibly thanking labourers, also displayed the Lord's benevolence and wealth. Through such pursuits, the upper class not only amused themselves, but also reaffirmed their dominion over land and nature. The journals of country gentlemen often contain meticulous accounts of record-breaking foxes caught or game bird tallies, testament to how seriously these amusements were taken, more of a competition than anything. But the upper class's country homes were not only bases for outdoor sport, there were also stages for continuous hospitality, and of course indoor entertainments. A Victorian country house weekend was a lavish production. Dozens of aristocratic guests might be invited to a ducal mansion for several days, each attended by maids or valets and treated to unceasing amusements. After the day's hunt or ride, evenings were filled with elegant pastimes. Enormous dinner parties took place nightly in dining rooms glittering with crystal and candlelight, where multi-course feasts and fine wines were served by footmen. Following dinner, the ladies and gentlemen separated briefly, the men lingering over port and cigars, and then rejoined in the drawing-room for diversions. They might listen to a talented guest perform Chopin's nocturnes on the grand piano, or gather around a billiard table. Nearly every great house had a billiard room for an after-dinner play. Victorian diaries are filled with mentions of parlour games enlivening these nights. Everything from charades and word games to more boisterous antics like mock fox hunts through the corridors. In some houses, amateur theatricals were put on. The family and guests would rehearse a short play or farce during the day, and then perform it in costume, of course to much laughter in the evening. Then there were card games too, they were a staple. Whist was the classic choice earlier in the era, evolving rather into bridge by the 1890s. And gambling could also become intense at such gatherings. Certainly not unheard of for aristocrats to win or lose thousands of pounds overnight at a card table, though all under a veneer of friendly play. For the hosts, keeping guests entertained was an art and an expectation. Some of the most famous estates like Chatsworth or Knowlesy had become legendary for their lavish weekend parties, where every hour had its appointed pleasure. The country house party, with its mix of hunting, feasting, music, and games, stood as the centerpiece of this upper-class social life, a private world of luxury that outsiders could only imagine with envy, if they could imagine it at all. While country life occupied much of the year, each spring the elite migrated to London for the season, a whirlwind of high society events aligned with the sitting of Parliament. For several months, typically April to July, the upper classes concentrated on urban glamour. By day, ladies paid calls and patronized the new department stores along Bond Street, and gentlemen attended their clubs or transacted politics. But by evening, the city's grand venues came alive. High society balls were the heart of the season. Night after night, the aristocracy donned formal attire. White tie and tails for men, silk gowns and diamonds for the ladies, and descended on the ballrooms of splendid townhouses and palaces. These balls, often hosting hundreds of guests, could be breathtaking in spectacle. One of the era's most famous events was the Duchess of Devonshire's lavish costume ball in 1897, where the future King Edward VII and hundreds of nobles danced through the night dressed as historical figures. Generally, such balls featured orchestras playing waltzes and quadrilles beneath glittering chandeliers. Young debutantes, fresh from their formal presentation at court, danced with eligible bachelors under the watchful eyes of chaperoning mothers, hoping to secure advantageous marriages. The social stakes were high, but so was the enjoyment. Contemporaries described ballrooms decked with hothouse flowers, supper tables overflowing with delicacies and champagne, and dancing that continued into the early hours of morning. But beyond balls, the season offered exclusive concerts, opulent dinner parties, and elite charity bazaars on a weekly basis. The aristocracy also gathered en masse at certain public events, which became social institutions of their own. Royal Ascot in June, for example, where the wealthy watched thoroughbreds race by day and picnicked in extravagant style between heats, all while parading their finest fashions. Similarly, the Henley Royal Regatta, a prestigious rowing event on the Thames, and the Epsom Derby were as much about the social C&B scene as about sport. Every opera night at Covent Garden or theatre premiere in the West End saw private boxes filled with titled families not only enjoying the performances, but also making a display of their presence. Queen Victoria's own attendance at the opera, or her hosting of afternoon garden parties at Buckingham Palace, set the seal on events that everyone in society strove to attend. In essence, the London season was a grand pageant of aristocratic life, dense with pleasures, but also with obligations. It maintained that cohesion of the ruling class, and gave them just another stage to dazzle one another, and the nation with their refined, if costly, way of life. But in addition to formal gatherings, upper-class men had their own sanctuaries of leisure. The Gentlemen's Club. London's clubland around St. James and Pall Mall was lined with elite establishments like White's, Brooks, and the Athenaeum, each catering to a particular clique of nobles, politicians, or military officers. These clubs were luxurious, all-male environments, equipped with libraries, dining, and game rooms. Here, over newspapers and brandy, aristocrats spent afternoons and evenings in relaxed camaraderie, put away from public scrutiny. Club activities ranged from intellectual talk to indulgent play. At White's, one of the oldest clubs by the way, members kept a famous betting book in which outrageous wagers were recorded. Gambling was a gentleman's vice. Some clubs virtually became private casinos overnight, with high stakes, whist games or baccarat games, seeing fortunes change hands. The Prince of Wales, that is the future King Edward VII, was notorious for his post-midnight card parties and love of the racetrack. His presence at a club or private soiree guaranteed a fashionable, if sometimes scandalous, scene. For those inclined to more sober recreation, clubs provided extensive libraries, billiards tables, and gourmet kitchens. A home away from home for the upper-crust male, Meanwhile, aristocratic women, barred from gentlemen's clubs, cultivated their own pastimes. Many high-born ladies devoted time to charitable committees or patronage of the arts, which also served as an acceptable social outlet. And they filled their days with social calls, letter writing, fashion fittings, and music practice. When it came to games of chance, some ladies hosted their own bridge evenings or parlor lotteries. But the social expectations kept their leisure more decorous than the gentlemen's. Still, in private, upper-class women enjoyed considerable pampering. A late breakfast in bed, leisurely hours of reading or painting, and a veritable army of servants to handle every mundane task, so that time could be spent on refinement or amusement. In the upper echelons, leisure was supported by the labor of others, making it possible for the elite to pursue pleasure with minimal inconvenience. But the wealthiest of the wealthiest did not confine their amusements to Britain. They roamed the world, in search of novelty and prestige. Foreign travel, well, that became a hallmark of upper-class leisure. During bleak English winters, many elites escaped to the sunny resorts on the French Riviera, or to therapeutic spas in the Alps. Aristocratic gentlemen undertook extravagant hunting expeditions across the empire and beyond. One might sail to India, or even Africa, for months on a tiger hunt or safari, bringing back trophies and a few tall tales to adorn the country house. Others indulged in the era's passion for antiquities by touring ancient sites in Greece, Italy, or Egypt, effectively extended grand tours updated for the Victorian age. The ease of steamships and international railways, and the global reach of the British Empire, too, made such journeys more accessible and safer to those who had the money to do them. But closer to home, some upper-class diversions bordered on the eccentric. There were private yacht clubs for those who loved sailing in style, exclusive regattas where only people of noble birth or great wealth could compete off the Isle of Wight. There were niche fashions in entertainment. One lord might host elaborate medieval-themed banquets in his castle, reflecting a Victorian romanticism for the past, while another sponsored scientific societies, or even private seances in high society salons, lending aristocratic glamour to the spiritualist entertainment. Basically, no entertainment or pleasure was beyond reach. The upper classes could transform any whim into an event. Their life was a curated sequence of seasons and settings, country, city, continent, each with its own amusements. Literally, the world is yours. So by 1900, the leisure pursuits of Victorians across all classes, and that goes all the way from the factory workers' music hall, song and dance, to the Duchess's grand ball, well, they all left their own legacy. I guess they just had a different flavor. One crucial change was the spread of literacy in the printed word. You see, by 1900, reading was a pastime that was open to pretty much everybody. From clerks devouring Dickens serials, to servants enjoying the penny dreadful comics. Everybody could read something. The era saw democratization of some entertainments and the enduring exclusivity of others. But whether modest or magnificent, these pastimes helped define Victorian culture. Notably as well, the Bank Holidays Act of 1871 had even enshrined a handful of paid holidays for workers, and that reflected how leisure was being recognized as a societal good. In the next century, we'd see cinemas, automobiles, and other modern inventions, like the Game Boy Color, that would change entertainment forever. You got to comment if you had a Game Boy Color. Really, you should. Well, already by the 1890s, even strict Sabbath rules were bending. Museums and parks began opening on Sundays so that workers could enjoy them on their only day off. And that's fair enough too, because what's the point in having a day off if everything's closed? But in any case, the foundation had been laid by those 19th century Britons who loved to enjoy themselves, each in their own way. Victorians even pioneered children's entertainment. By the end of the era, toy shops were selling board games and mechanical toys. And writers like Lewis Carroll and Robert Louis Stevenson had created timeless adventure tales for the young. Ah, the world of entertainment, expanding in every direction. Oh, well, the things we have in our modern day. So many choices, that's the problem, isn't it? What do I like to do? Well, I like painting miniatures, although I live abroad now, so I don't paint miniatures at the moment, but I have a cupboard full of painted miniatures. Think of things like Flames of War, Warhammer 40k. We do a bit of war gaming, me and my friends. Yeah, miss the boys. Got to get back and visit them. What else do? I do read a lot, obviously. I also play guitar. I like to go for walks. I like to go out and drink coffee at pretentious little cafes. Things like that. And just meet with new people, go traveling, this kind of thing. Anyway, maybe you are interested in what I like to do in my free time, but you're probably not. Well, I'm going to read off the top-tier patrons and supporters. Well, actually, tell me if you're still here, what you do in your free time. That's interesting. But anyway, we've got Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Carrie, Charlene, Lynn, Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfednir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuronerd, Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Ryan, Thor, Cameron, Stefan, Kevin, HMSHH, Crystal, Anthony, Lucy, Brandon, Gugu Bubonic, Nicholas, Craig, Neftis, Alexander, Gokhan, Dorsey, Benita, Claire, Courtesy, Carol, Robert, Mary, Bridget, Nefertari, Yvette, Miss Mochi, 11, Allison, Free American, Jennifer, Brittany, David, Cody, Brian, Are You My Mum, Rhonda, Carrie, KTP, Lovely, Boma, Kevin, Marissa, Altazakin, Lucy, Julianne, Rosie, Tivolo, Chris, Apocalyptic, Brandy, Wolfsbane, Dude, Brinny, Aidan, Fabian, Michael, Agworm, Prince of Persia, River, Indian Trail, Catherine, Alexa, Big Gun 101, Brandy, Pesty Hun, Stevie, Jessica, Scott, Gail, Emily, Jade, Jake, Demon's Toe, and Mason. All right, well, thank you so much. It's been good to have you with me today, and yeah, I suppose I will see you next time you feel like coming back. Thank you very much. Good night, lots of love to you all, and farewell for now.